The slap echoed through first class like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to fracture and stop. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin as 10-year-old Jane Hayes stood frozen in the aisle, her small hand pressed against a cheek that burned with a sudden blossoming fire. Tears welled in her dark brown eyes, threatening to spill as she stared up at the woman who had just struck her. Flight attendant Jennifer Morrison towered over the child, her own hand still half raised, her face a mask of rage over a spilled cup of coffee. Every passenger was a witness. The businessman in 2A, the elderly woman clutching her pearls in 3C, the young mother instinctively shielding her own child's eyes in 4B. They had all seen it. But there was one witness Jennifer Morrison hadn't noticed. 3 rows back, in the last seat of first class, a man in a simple baseball cap and a casual jacket sat perfectly still. His hands gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles shone white. A muscle feathered in his clenched jaw as he watched his daughter stand there, humiliated and hurt before a gallery of strangers. Robert Hayes had been watching everything. Every dismissive comment, every cruel gesture, every small moment of mistreatment his little girl had endured. And Jennifer Morrison had no idea that the child she had just assaulted was the daughter of the CEO of Skyline Airlines. She had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, her entire world was about to come crashing down. But this nightmare hadn't begun with a slap. It had started 2 hours earlier, with the quiet hum of excitement in Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Jane Hayes had been looking forward to this day for weeks. At 10 years old, she was finally old enough to fly alone, and her father had planned something special for her first solo journey. Flight 447 to New York wasn't just a trip. It was a secret mission to surprise her mother for her birthday. Jane could barely contain the thrill as she walked through the busy terminal, her small rolling suitcase trailing behind her like a faithful companion. She was a bright 5th grader, the kind of child who said please and thank you without being reminded and always had her nose buried in a book. Today she wore her favorite purple dress and white sneakers, her hair in neat braids with colorful beads that clicked softly as she walked. Tucked safely in her backpack was a handmade birthday card covered in glitter and hearts, alongside a mystery novel about a girl detective. What Jane didn't know was that she wasn't traveling alone at all. 50 feet behind her, a man in a plain gray hoodie and a black baseball cap pulled low over his eyes followed his daughter's journey. Robert Hayes had checked in under a different reservation, deliberately booking a seat in economy while Jane sat in first class. This was her adventure, her chance to feel independent. He just wanted to watch from a distance, to see her navigate this milestone with the confidence he had worked so hard to build in her. As they neared the gate, Robert hung back, pretending to check his phone while Jane presented her boarding pass. He watched her smile politely, thank the agent, and walk down the jetway with her head held high. Pride swelled in his chest. His baby girl was growing up. The first-class cabin of Flight 447 was a world of quiet luxury. Jane found her window seat, 5A, and carefully stowed her suitcase in the overhead bin, managing the weight herself. She settled in, running her hands over the smooth leather, savoring every detail. That's when she first noticed the flight attendant watching her. Jennifer Morrison stood near the galley, her expression laced with suspicion as she took in the young black girl sitting so comfortably in seat 5A. Jennifer leaned toward her colleague, Amanda. "That kid in 5A, she whispered, her voice sharp. "She doesn't belong here. Must be a mix-up with the tickets." Amanda glanced over at Jane, who was now pulling out her book, oblivious. "She has a first-class pass," Amanda replied quietly. "I saw it." Jennifer's lips thinned. "We'll see about that. Something's not right." 3 rows back, in economy, Robert had settled into his seat. Through the gap in the curtain separating the cabins, he had a perfect view of his daughter. He smiled as he watched her open her book, her legs swinging slightly, not quite reaching the floor. His smile faded when he saw Jennifer Morrison approach her. Jane looked up. "Hi," she said brightly. "Could I please have some apple juice when you get a chance?" Jennifer stared down at her, her expression cold. "You'll need to wait," she said curtly. "We're still boarding." "Oh, okay, thank you," Jane replied, her smile faltering. Jennifer turned and walked away without another word. Robert's jaw tightened. He'd seen the dismissive look. heard the clipped tone. A cold knot formed in his stomach, but he remained still, watching. 20 minutes later, the beverage cart emerged, pushed by Jennifer, her professional smile now firmly in place. She moved down the aisle with practiced grace, offering scotch, champagne, and coffee with warm efficiency. But when she reached row 5, the cart rolled right past Jane without slowing. Jane looked up, confused, ready to politely remind her, but Jennifer was already at the next row, her cheerful mask back on. Across the aisle, Margaret Chen, a woman of 72 with silver hair and sharp eyes, had seen enough. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice clear and firm. "Miss, you skipped this young lady." Jennifer turned, her smile tightening. "I'm sorry?" "This child," Margaret said, gesturing to Jane. "You didn't take her order." Jennifer's eyes flickered with irritation. "I'll get to her." "You got to everyone else," Margaret pressed. The cabin grew quiet as other passengers began to pay attention. Jennifer's expression hardened. She turned to Jane, her voice like ice. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Jane blinked. "I already showed it." "I need to see it again," Jennifer snapped. "There might have been a mistake." Her heart pounding, Jane fumbled in her backpack for the pass. Jennifer snatched it from her trembling fingers, making a show of examining it, holding it to the light as if it were a forgery. The seconds stretched into an eternity of humiliation for Jane. Finally, Jennifer tossed the pass back onto the tray table without apology. "Apple juice?" Jane whispered, her voice barely audible. "We'll see," Jennifer replied coldly, and pushed her cart away. As Jane tried to put the pass back, her shaking hands knocked her backpack to the floor, its contents spilling into the aisle. Pencils and a notebook scattered. She dropped to her knees, frantically trying to gather her things. "What are you doing?" Jennifer's voice cracked like a whip. "You're making a mess. Clean it up now." A man from the row behind, David Richardson, knelt to help. "Hey, it's okay," he said gently to Jane, handing her the notebook. He stood and faced the flight attendant. "She's a child. There's no need to speak to her that way." "Sir, return to your seat," Jennifer seethed. "I will, as soon as you treat this girl with basic respect." "She needs to learn to control herself," Jennifer shot back. Back in her seat, Jane clutched her backpack like a shield, making herself as small as possible. 3 rows away, Robert Hayes was typing furiously on his phone, a steady stream of texts documenting every word, every action. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes burned. Just before takeoff, Jane felt a pressing need to use the bathroom. She raised her hand tentatively. Jennifer saw her but looked away. "Excuse me, miss?" Jane tried again, a little louder. Jennifer turned, her face a storm of impatience. "What?" "May I please use the bathroom?" "We're about to take off. You'll have to wait." "But we're still at the gate," Jane pointed out softly. "I said wait." Not 2 minutes later, a white woman in row 3 asked if her son, a boy of about 8, could use the restroom. Jennifer's demeanor transformed. "Of course," she chirped. "Go ahead, sweetie." Jane watched in disbelief as the boy hurried past. The differential treatment was so blatant it was breathtaking. Across the aisle, Margaret gave her a look of soft encouragement, but Jane felt like she was breaking apart inside. Later, as the plane cruised high above the clouds, Jennifer maneuvered the beverage cart down the aisle again. As she passed Jane's seat, the cart lurched, and Jennifer's arm bumped hard into Jane's, knocking her book from her hands. "You need to keep your arms inside your seat area," Jennifer said sharply, blaming her for the collision. Jane said nothing, simply unbuckling to retrieve her book. As her fingers closed around it, she felt a sudden pressure. Jennifer had stepped forward, her shoe planted firmly on the book's cover. For 3 long seconds she held it there, staring down at Jane with cold, hard eyes before lifting her foot and walking away. Jane picked up her book and saw the dirty footprint smudged across her favorite story. That was it. The crack inside her broke wide open. She returned to her seat, staring at the mark, and the tears she had held back for so long began to fall, silent and hot, down her cheeks. Exhausted in a way no 10-year-old should ever be, she did the only thing she could think of to escape. She reclined her seat, pulled her sweater over her shoulders, and closed her eyes, praying for sleep to carry her to New York. She had been asleep for maybe 20 minutes when a rough shaking pulled her from the merciful darkness. "Excuse me. Excuse me." Jane's eyes flew open, disoriented. Jennifer Morrison stood over her, a hand gripping her shoulder with unnecessary force. "You need to sit up," the flight attendant demanded. Jane blinked, her mind foggy with sleep. "What? Why?" "You're disrupting other passengers." The passenger in the seat ahead was asleep. Across the aisle, a businessman had donned his headphones, his eyes peacefully closed. Margaret Chen was absorbed in a magazine. No one seemed disturbed. No one was paying attention at all. "I'm sorry," Jane whispered, the words trembling out of her almost by instinct. "I didn't mean to." "Just sit up properly," Jennifer snapped. Jane straightened her seat back, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She hadn't done anything. She'd been perfectly silent, perfectly still. Yet she apologized, because that's what you did. You apologized when an adult accused you, even when you knew deep down that you were innocent. From the galley, where she had been organizing supplies, Amanda Peters had seen the whole exchange. As Jennifer walked away from Jane's seat, Amanda intercepted her. "Jennifer," she said softly, glancing toward the little girl in 5A, who now sat as rigid as a statue. "Maybe we should ease up. She's just a child. She isn't causing any trouble." Jennifer rounded on her, her voice a low, sharp hiss. "Someone has to keep these people in line, Amanda. If you don't have the backbone for it, then stay out of my way." Amanda's eyes widened. "These people? Jennifer, what are you talking about?" "I said stay out of it." Jennifer's tone was a steel door slamming shut. Amanda opened her mouth to argue, then thought better of it and closed it. She was new, barely a year out of training. Jennifer was senior crew. A hot flush of shame crept up Amanda's neck as she turned away, hating her own cowardice but paralyzed by it. 3 rows back, Robert Hayes had heard every word. The curtain dividing first class was only partially drawn, and in the tight confines of the cabin, sound traveled. His knuckles were white where he gripped the armrests, the veins standing out on his neck. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to get up, to put an end to this. But he forced himself to remain still. He had to see how far it would go. He had to let the whole ugly scene play out. If he intervened now, it could be dismissed as a misunderstanding, an isolated incident. He needed the full picture, even if watching his daughter suffer was a kind of torture. An hour into the flight, the meal service began. Carts glided down the aisle as lunch was distributed to the first-class passengers. Jane received a tray: chicken, rice, vegetables, and a small salad. Her appetite had vanished, but she picked at the food, grateful for a distraction from Jennifer's simmering hostility. 2 rows ahead, a man in an expensive suit, Thomas Wade, took a single bite of his chicken and immediately pressed the call button. Jennifer was at his side in an instant. "Yes, sir? How may I help you?" "This meal is cold," he said, gesturing at the plate with disdain. Jennifer's expression flooded with practiced concern. "Oh, I am so sorry, Mr. Wade. That is completely unacceptable. Allow me to get you a fresh meal at once, and please, accept a complimentary glass of wine for the inconvenience." "That would be appreciated," he replied. Jennifer hurried off, returning moments later with a steaming plate, a glass of red wine, and an extra dessert. "Again, my sincerest apologies. If there is anything else at all I can do for you, please do not hesitate to ask." Thomas nodded, mollified. Jane had watched the entire performance. She looked down at her own plate. Her chicken was also cold, the rice barely lukewarm. She didn't want to complain, didn't want to draw any more unwanted attention. But if it was all right for that man to get a hot meal, then perhaps it was all right for her too. She raised her hand tentatively, the way she did in school. "Excuse me?" Jennifer turned, her face instantly hardening. "What?" My food is also cold. Could I maybe get—" "You should be grateful you have food at all." Jennifer cut her off, her voice laced with contempt. "There are children in this world who would be thrilled to have that meal, cold or not." Jane's face burned. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Then eat it and stop complaining." The atmosphere in the cabin seemed to drop 20 degrees. The passengers who had been politely ignoring the situation could no longer pretend. The contrast was too stark, the discrimination too blatant. For Margaret Chen, it was the final straw. The 72-year-old woman unbuckled her seatbelt and rose to her feet, her small frame radiating an astonishing fury. "That is enough," she declared, her voice ringing through the quiet cabin. "I demand to speak to the captain, right now." Jennifer whirled around, her professional veneer cracking. "Ma'am, you need to sit down." I will not sit down while you abuse this child. I'm not abusing anyone, I'm doing my job. Your job, Margaret shot back, is to serve passengers with respect. You have shown this girl nothing but contempt since she stepped on this plane. I have been flying for 50 years, and I have never witnessed such disgraceful behavior. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the cabin. David Richardson nodded emphatically. Even Thomas Wade looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowed. Jennifer's face went crimson. If you don't sit down immediately, I will have you removed from this flight. We are at 30,000 feet, Margaret said dryly. How precisely do you intend to do that? I can have you arrested for interfering with a crew member when we land. Then arrest me, Margaret challenged. I would be delighted to tell the authorities exactly what I have witnessed here today. Jane began to cry, not the silent tears from before, but wrenching sobs that shook her small shoulders. The confrontation, the stares, the suffocating weight of it all, it was too much. She buried her face in her hands, trying to disappear. Jennifer's gaze snapped back to Jane, her expression twisting into something cruel. Are you too young to fly alone? Is that it? Maybe your parents shouldn't send you on trips you can't handle. The words were like blows. Jane cried harder, unable to speak, unable to defend herself. David Richardson quietly raised his phone and pointed the camera at Jennifer. I'm recording this, he said, his voice steady. Every word. Put that phone away right now, Jennifer shrieked. It is illegal to record crew members. No, it is not, David replied calmly, keeping the phone level. And this is most certainly an incident worth documenting. I'm calling the captain, Jennifer threatened, but her voice faltered. She saw other phones being raised, saw the judgment in the eyes all around her. She had lost control. But instead of backing down, her anger intensified. In her mind, she was not the problem. Jane was. And Jennifer Morrison was about to make a decision that would shatter her career. Jane couldn't bear it another second. She had to get away. She unbuckled her belt and stood, wiping tears on the sleeve of her purple dress. Her legs were shaky as she stepped into the aisle, making her way toward the lavatory at the front of the cabin. She had only taken 3 steps when Jennifer moved to block her path. Where do you think you're going? Jane looked up, her voice a fragile whisper. The bathroom. You can't just wander around the cabin. I need to use the bathroom, please. Something in Jennifer snapped. She reached out and grabbed Jane's shoulder, her fingers digging in. You need to sit down, now. Then she pushed. It was not a nudge, but a forceful shove. Jane stumbled backward, her arms flailing for balance. Her hand brushed against the beverage cart parked in the aisle. The cart rocked, and a cup of coffee on its surface tipped, splashing hot, dark liquid all over Jennifer's uniform. For a heartbeat, the cabin was frozen. Jane stared in horror at the stain spreading across the blue fabric. It was an accident. She had been pushed. But she saw in Jennifer's eyes that it didn't matter. The flight attendant's face contorted with a pure, unrestrained rage. You little... Her scream ripped through the air. Look what you did. I'm sorry, Jane gasped. You pushed me, and You did this on purpose. No, I promise, Jennifer's hand moved faster than anyone could react. The slap echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Jane's head snapped to the side from the force of it, sending her staggering. A moment of numb shock, and then the pain bloomed, a fierce, stinging fire across her left cheek. Her hand flew to her face, feeling the heat of the imprint already forming. An absolute, profound silence fell over first class. Every passenger was frozen, paralyzed by what they had just seen. A flight attendant had just struck a child. Jane stood in the aisle, hand pressed to her burning cheek, silent tears now streaming down her face. She couldn't understand why this woman hated her so much. 3 rows back, Robert Hayes rose from his seat. His face was a mask of cold calm, but his eyes burned with a fury that was almost a physical force. He moved with a deliberate, controlled grace, each step measured. Margaret Chen began hammering her call button, once, twice, 3, 4 times, the chime a frantic alarm through the stunned cabin. David Richardson's phone was still recording, his hands shaking but his aim steady. He had captured it all. Oh my God, a woman whispered. She hit her, another passenger said louder. Did you see that? She actually hit her. The cabin erupted. Passengers unbuckled their belts, rising to their feet, their voices a chorus of disbelief and outrage. Jennifer stood in the center of the storm, the coffee staining her uniform, the reality of her actions finally piercing her rage. Her hands slowly fell to her side. She looked from Jane to the passengers and back to Jane, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "I didn't. She spilled coffee on me." Her stammered excuses were lost in the rising fury. Amanda Peters watched from the galley, her hand clamped over her mouth. She had known Jennifer was being cruel, but she had never imagined this. The cockpit door swung open and the co-pilot, Sarah Mitchell, stepped out. "What is going on?" Her words died on her lips as she took in the scene. Jane, hand to her face, weeping. Jennifer, stained and wild-eyed, the entire cabin on its feet, shouting. Sarah's training took over. "Everyone, please return to your seats." "She hit that little girl," Margaret Chen yelled, pointing. "I saw it. She slapped her right across the face." "We all saw it," David called out, holding up his phone. "I have it on video." Sarah's face went pale. She turned to Jennifer. "Is this true?" Jennifer opened her mouth, but no sound came out. What could she say? And then a new voice cut through the chaos, quiet, cold, and absolute. "Step away from my daughter." Robert Hayes emerged from behind the curtain. He had taken off his baseball cap, his face now fully visible. As he walked into the first-class cabin, Jennifer Morrison's world imploded. She knew that face. Every single employee of Skyline Airlines knew that face. Founder and CEO Robert Hayes. And she had just assaulted his daughter. The blood drained from her face. Her knees threatened to buckle. Robert didn't even look at her. His focus was entirely on Jane. He knelt beside her, his large hands gently cupping her face, tilting it to see the angry red mark. A muscle jumped in his jaw. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he murmured, his voice soft, for her alone. Jane collapsed into his arms, her body shaking with sobs. He held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head, whispering that she was safe now, that he was here. After a long moment, he gently pulled back. "I need you to go sit with Mrs. Chen for a minute. Can you do that for me?" Jane nodded, hiccuping. Margaret was already there, guiding Jane into the seat beside her, wrapping a protective arm around her. Only then did Robert stand and turn his full attention to Jennifer Morrison. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the cabin. "Your name, and your employee ID number, now." Jennifer's mouth worked, but no sound came out. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Jennifer Morrison," she stammered. "Employee number 47239. Robert took out his phone and typed the information with slow, deliberate precision. The rage beneath his composure was a palpable thing. "Sir," Jennifer began, her voice a desperate rush. "I am so sorry. If I had known who she was—" Robert's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her flinch. "If you had known who she was," he repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "That is precisely the problem, Ms. Morrison. You thought it was acceptable to abuse a child. So long as she wasn't related to someone you considered important, you decided my daughter was less than human because you didn't recognize her last name? Every single person who boards a Skyline Airlines flight deserves to be treated with dignity. Every child deserves to feel safe. That isn't a guideline. That is the foundation of this company. Please," she sobbed, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I made a mistake. I was having a bad day." "A bad day?" Robert's voice rose for the first time, sharp and resonant. "You terrorized a 10-year-old girl for 2 hours, you humiliated her, you pushed her, and then you struck her across the face because you were having a bad day?" A gasp came from the galley. Amanda Peters finally understood. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand over her mouth. "That's Robert Hayes." The name rippled through the cabin, and the passengers, already furious, now watched in stunned silence, realizing they were witnesses to a reckoning. The co-pilot, Sarah Mitchell, stood at full, horrified attention. Recognition hit Sarah like a physical blow. Robert Hayes. She'd met him only once, 2 years ago at a sterile company event, but a face like his wasn't one you forgot. The owner of the airline, on her flight. The realization was a cascade of ice water, a nightmare unfolding at 30,000 feet. "Mr. Hayes," Sarah managed, her voice a fragile shell of professionalism over the tremor in her hands. "How can I help you, sir?" Robert turned, and for a moment, the icy fury in his eyes softened with a flicker of empathy. This young flight attendant was blameless. She'd been in the cockpit, doing her job. Contact Captain Wilson, he said, his tone low but absolute. Tell him I need this aircraft back at the gate. Now. Right away, sir. Sarah nodded, the motion sharp and definite. She spun around and hurried toward the cockpit, but paused with her hand on the door, turning back. Mr. Hayes, I am so deeply sorry this happened on our flight. We'll discuss it later, Ms. Mitchell, he said, his gaze unyielding. Right now, I need us on the ground. Sarah vanished into the cockpit. Through the still open door, her voice could be heard, stripped of all calm. Captain, we have a situation. We have to return to Atlanta, immediately. Nearby, Jennifer had collapsed onto a jump seat, her body racked by a tremor she couldn't control. She knew. Oh, she knew her career was over. 23 years of service, incinerated in a single, fiery moment of rage. But even now, even staring at the face of the man who owned her future, she couldn't fully grasp the magnitude of what she had done. She had struck a child. Not just any child, but the daughter of the man who signed her paychecks. More than that, she had unleashed a hatred so deeply ingrained that it had broken through the surface, in full view of her employer. Robert turned from Jennifer, his focus shifting to the stunned passengers who had witnessed it all. His voice regained its calm, controlled quality, but now it was laced with a thread of gratitude. I need to ask for your help, he said, addressing the cabin. I need statements from anyone who saw what happened. A woman was on her feet in an instant. I saw everything. From the moment she boarded, that woman treated your daughter with nothing but contempt. I'll give you a statement, and I'll testify in court if I have to. Robert gave her a small, appreciative nod. Thank you, ma'am. Your name? Margaret Chen, seat 5C. She gestured to Jane, who was still huddled under her protective arm. This child did nothing wrong. Nothing. She was polite, quiet, and respectful. What that woman did to her was unconscionable. A man in the next row stood. David Richardson, 6B. He held up his phone. I have video of the last 20 minutes, including the moment she struck your daughter. I'll send it to you right now, and I'm happy to provide a full statement. I appreciate that, Mr. Richardson. Robert took the man's business card, his mind a steel trap for the details. A chorus of voices rose to corroborate the story, passengers leaning into the aisle, their words overlapping in their eagerness to support the small, wronged girl and her father. Thomas Wade, 2A. I saw her refuse to serve your daughter while serving everyone around her. Emily Parker, 4B. She let my son use the lavatory but told your daughter to wait. The difference in treatment was blatant. Dr. Stephen Brooks, 3D. I witnessed the entire confrontation. That flight attendant's behavior was discriminatory from the very start. One by one, they offered their accounts. Some recited phone numbers for Robert to call. Others scribbled their observations on napkins and scraps of paper. The evidence was a tidal wave. 30 witnesses, multiple videos, and the damning red handprint still blooming on Jane's cheek. Through it all, Jennifer remained slumped in the jump seat, a ghost in her own uniform. Her career, her reputation, her life as she knew it was disintegrating around her. Nearby, another flight attendant, Amanda Peters, stood frozen, a corrosive guilt eating at her. She should have done more, should have reported Jennifer, should have stood between her and that little girl. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, taut and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a situation that requires us to return to the gate. We apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate your patience. The plane banked, a slow, heavy turn back toward Atlanta. Through the windows, the city lights grew larger, pulling them back to earth. Robert knelt beside Jane, who sat quietly with Margaret Chen. The tears had stopped, but her eyes were red and swollen, the mark on her cheek now darkening to a bruised purple. How are you doing, baby? He asked softly. Jane's voice was small, a confused whisper. Why were you on the plane, Daddy? You said I was flying alone. His expression softened, a painful mix of love and regret. I wanted to be sure you were safe. I was going to stay hidden the whole flight, let you have your adventure, but I'm glad I was here. I'm so sorry this happened to you. Did I do something wrong? The question shattered Robert's composure. No, sweetheart, he said, his voice thick. You did nothing wrong. Not one single thing. Some people carry so much hurt and anger inside them, and sometimes they let it spill onto others. That is their problem, not yours. You were perfect. Jane nodded, but he could see in her eyes she didn't fully believe him. The damage Jennifer had wrought wouldn't be healed with a few words. His daughter would carry the memory of this flight for the rest of her life, and Robert Hayes would make damn sure no other child ever had to endure it. The plane touched down with a gentle bump. As it taxied to the gate, Robert stood and addressed the first-class cabin. I want to thank each of you for speaking up, for defending my daughter when she couldn't defend herself. You didn't have to get involved. You could have looked away, but you chose to stand for what was right, and that matters more than you will ever know. Margaret Chen patted Jane's hand gently. Your daughter is a remarkable young lady, Mr. Hayes. She handled herself with a grace no child should ever have to learn. Because of people like you, Robert replied. Thank you for protecting her. The plane came to a final stop. Outside the windows, flashing lights from security vehicles danced in the darkness. Word had clearly traveled fast. The CEO's daughter, assaulted on his own airline. This was no longer a customer service failure. It was a corporate crisis. Jennifer Morrison finally raised her head from her hands as the full, crushing reality of her actions settled upon her. One moment of blind rage had destroyed everything, and the worst part, the truth she could never escape, was that Robert Hayes was right. She hadn't cared who Jane was. She had only cared what she looked like, and that fact would haunt her for the rest of her days. The jet bridge connected with a heavy, final thud. As Jennifer's broken sobs echoed through the cabin, Robert Hayes pulled out his phone. Marcus, it's Robert. I need you at gate B-17 immediately. Bring Linda from HR. One of our flight attendants just assaulted my daughter on flight 447. I need you here now. Marcus Chen, head of security, was all business. On our way, ETA 3 minutes. Robert made a second call. Linda, Robert Hayes, we have a critical incident at B-17, employee misconduct, assault of a minor. Bring your recording equipment. The cockpit door swung open. Captain James Wilson emerged, his face a mask of confidence that crumbled the moment he saw Robert Hayes. The captain's expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror as he took in the scene. The crying child with a bruised cheek, the sobbing flight attendant, and a cabin filled with 30 angry witnesses. Mr. Hayes, Captain Wilson said, his voice cautious. I was told we had a situation. Robert's voice was pure ice. Captain, were you aware of any issues in your cabin during this flight? I heard raised voices about 20 minutes ago. Sarah checked and informed me it was being handled. Being handled? Robert's words cut like a surgeon's scalpel. A 10-year-old child was terrorized, discriminated against, and physically assaulted in your cabin, Captain, and you believed it was being handled? The color drained from the captain's face. Sir, I trusted my crew to manage cabin issues while I focused on flying the aircraft. Trust is earned, Captain, and accountability is not optional. You are the commander of this aircraft. Everything that happens on board is your responsibility. You heard a disturbance and you failed to investigate personally. A child was harmed as a result. The aircraft door opened. Marcus Chen entered with 3 security officers, followed closely by Linda Shaw from HR, carrying a tablet. Mr. Hayes, Marcus said, what do you need? Robert gestured to the crumpled figure on the jump seat. That is Jennifer Morrison, employee 47239. She is to be escorted off this aircraft and held for questioning. She will not retrieve personal belongings unsupervised. She will not speak to other crew members, and she will not leave this airport. Marcus nodded to his officers, who moved to flank Jennifer. Robert then addressed Linda. I'm providing my statement first. Then I want a statement from every willing passenger. His account was methodical, precise, and devastatingly factual. He described the suspicious glances, the refused service, the discriminatory bathroom denial, the cold meal, the rough awakening, the push, and finally, the slap. He provided times and quoted exact phrases, his voice devoid of emotion but heavy with indisputable authority. When he finished, Jennifer finally spoke, her voice ragged. That's not how it happened. The girl was being difficult. She was disruptive. When she spilled the coffee, I reacted. It wasn't like he's describing. Robert's head turned slowly toward her. Really? Jane was disruptive? He raised his voice to the cabin. Can anyone here confirm that my daughter was disruptive, disrespectful, or difficult in any way? The denial was immediate and overwhelming. Absolutely not, Margaret Chen declared. her voice ringing with indignation. That child was a model passenger. She sat quietly reading. She didn't complain when she was ignored or argue when she was accused. If every passenger behaved as well as that little girl, flying would be a pleasure. "I've flown first class for 20 years, Thomas Wade added. That child wasn't disruptive. She was more mature than most adults I've shared a cabin with. David Richardson held up his phone again. My video directly contradicts every word Ms. Morrison just said. The girl was respectful. The flight attendant was aggressive, discriminatory, and violent. The testimony continued, a consistent, detailed, and damning indictment of Jennifer's lies. Finally, Margaret Chen stepped into the aisle, her presence commanding silence. What I witnessed today wasn't just poor customer service, she said, her voice trembling with conviction. It was racism. That flight attendant looked at a black child in first class and decided she didn't belong. Every action, every word, every dismissive gesture was rooted in prejudice. I am 72 years old. I lived through segregation. I know this hatred when I see it. What happened to your daughter today was discrimination, pure and simple. The cabin fell utterly silent. Margaret had given voice to the ugly truth everyone was thinking. From the galley, a sob broke the stillness. Amanda Peters, the other flight attendant, stepped forward. She's right, she choked out. Jennifer, she said horrible things. I heard them. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't stop her. I told her to ease up, and when she blew me off, I walked away. I should have protected that little girl. I was scared. And I was a coward. Robert's gaze fixed on her. What's your name? Amanda Peters, sir, employee 52847. How long have you flown for Skyline? 14 months, sir. Robert nodded slowly. You're right, Ms. Peters. You should have done more. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity. When you witness discrimination, you have an obligation to intervene. Tears streamed down Amanda's face. I know. I'm so sorry. Sorry is not enough, Robert said, his tone firm but not cruel. But acknowledgement is a start. You are suspended, pending a full investigation. You will undergo mandatory retraining on discrimination and intervention protocols. If you complete it and demonstrate a genuine understanding, you may have a future here. But that is not a guarantee. I understand, sir. Thank you. He turned to Captain Wilson. Captain, you're one of our most experienced pilots, but today you failed as commander of this aircraft. Leadership is more than just flying the plane. It's knowing what is happening in your cabin. The captain's jaw was tight. You're right, sir. I should have investigated. I failed in my command. Yes, you did. You are suspended for 2 weeks without pay. You will undergo leadership and discrimination awareness training. When you return, I expect you to be the kind of captain who would never let this happen on your watch again. Understood, sir. It will not happen again. Finally, Robert turned his gaze to Jennifer. Jennifer Morrison, you are terminated from Skyline Airlines effective immediately. Your benefits end today. Your flight privileges are revoked. You will never work for this company again, and we will be pursuing all available legal remedies for your assault of a minor. Her sobs were her only answer. Marcus Chen and his officers gently took her by the arms and escorted her from the aircraft. Her walk of shame down the jet bridge was a silent spectacle for the dozens of airport personnel who had gathered below. While Linda Shaw methodically collected passenger statements and David Richardson transferred his video evidence to the airline's secure servers, Robert walked to the front of the cabin and picked up the intercom handset. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Robert Hayes, CEO of Skyline Airlines. I am speaking to you now not as an executive but as a father. Today, one of our employees terrorized, discriminated against, and ultimately struck my 10-year-old daughter. What happened in this cabin was inexcusable and contrary to every value this airline stands for. That employee has been terminated. Other crew members who failed in their duty have been suspended. He paused, his voice resonating with resolve. Every passenger on this flight will receive a full refund, a travel credit for double your fare, and my personal commitment that we will do better. Starting tomorrow, every Skyline employee will begin mandatory, comprehensive anti-discrimination training. We will implement new, anonymous reporting systems for passenger complaints. I am deeply sorry for what you were forced to witness, and to those of you who spoke up, who refused to look away, thank you. Your courage matters. He hung up the handset. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Thomas Wade began to clap. Margaret Chen joined him. Within seconds, the entire first-class cabin was applauding, not for the refunds, but for a leader who had met a moment of crisis with immediate, unwavering justice. Robert didn't acknowledge the applause. He walked back to Jane, scooped her into his arms, and held her close. "Can we go home now, Daddy?" she whispered into his shoulder. "Yeah, baby," he whispered back. "We can go home now." In the terminal, after carrying Jane off the plane, Robert knelt beside her. "Daddy, was it my fault?" she asked again, the question a quiet wound. He took her small hands in his. "No, sweetheart. Absolutely not. Nothing that happened was your fault." Then, why did she hate me? She didn't even know me. Robert took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Some people, baby, carry prejudice in their hearts. They judge people by how they look instead of who they are. She looked at your beautiful brown skin and made ugly, wrong assumptions. But her prejudice isn't about you. It's about the hate she carries inside herself." Margaret Chen approached them, her smile warm. "Sweetheart, you handled yourself with such grace today. You are a remarkable young lady." She gave Jane a gentle hug. David Richardson was right behind her. "Mr. Hayes, the video has been sent. If you need me to testify, just call." Robert shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Richardson. What you did today mattered." In the week that followed, Robert implemented sweeping changes at Skyline Airlines. Every employee, from the tarmac to the boardroom, began mandatory diversity and sensitivity training. The company launched an anonymous reporting system for discrimination, with every complaint reviewed personally by his office. At town hall meetings in every major hub, his message was clear. "What happened to my daughter could have happened to any child, to any passenger," he told his employees. "If you work for this airline, you will treat every single person with dignity and respect, or you will not work here anymore." The story hit the news with headlines blaring, "CEO's daughter assaulted on his own airline." The public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive, though a few critics accused him of overreacting. Robert addressed them in an open letter. "My daughter was slapped by an adult entrusted with her safety. She could have been anyone's child. Dignity and respect are not privileges to be earned. They are fundamental human rights. What happened to Jane was wrong, not because she is my daughter, but because she is a human being." At school, Jane stood before her class and bravely shared her story. "Sometimes people will treat you badly because of how you look," she told them. "But that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. And if you see someone being treated unfairly, you should say something. You should be brave." Her classmates gave her a standing ovation. Jennifer Morrison's attorney requested a meeting to discuss a settlement. Robert's response, delivered through his legal team, was a single sentence: "There will be no settlement." Amanda Peters completed her retraining and wrote Jane a long, heartfelt letter of apology. After meeting with Robert and demonstrating a genuine commitment to change, she was reinstated. Her new role included mentoring junior flight attendants on intervention and passenger advocacy. Captain Wilson spent his suspension volunteering with youth organizations. He returned humbled, a leader committed to never again being blind to what happened under his command.